Thanks for staying with us, everyone. What a show we've got going here. Phenomenon Radio Live is kicking 2018 off with a powerful foot. And before we can begin tonight's interview in the second hour with Steven Bassett of the Paradigm Research Group, it's time for the news. And it's brought to us all by earthfiles.com. Here's Linda Moulton Howe. Linda?
Thank you, Race. A few minutes after midnight on Sunday, January 7th, 2018, according to the video timestamp on a security camera, an explosion of light filled the entire sky, along with a loud boom sound, and it was caught on security cameras and others at the same time that the ground shook. And this is a quote from the Siberian Times in Russia. Over thousands of miles in Russia, close quote. The geographic focus with the most intensity seemed to be in the Ural Mountains between Eastern Europe and West Siberia. Some people were afraid it was a nuclear strike against North Korea by the United States. But the UK Mail reported that, quote, Russian officials and scientists immediately denied that there had been a Russian missile test or any reported space rock crashing to Earth, close quote. So they dismissed the idea of a bolide and a meteorite, perhaps because of the words that this occurred in Russia on Sunday night, January 7th, over more than 1,000 miles. Russian leader Vladimir Putin also denied that there were any military tests that could have caused this bright sky-filling light, flash, boom, and ground shaking over such a large region. Others worried that it was a UFO coming in from outer space or a meteor exploding in the atmosphere, as happened in Chelyabinsk in Russia when a 20-meter diameter large bolide entered the Earth's atmosphere on February 15, 2013. That came in with a speed of about 40,000 miles an hour over the southern Ural region and exploded in the air with a bright flash of light. Scientists said that was the largest known natural object to enter the Earth's atmosphere since the 1918 Tunguska event, which destroyed a large forested area of Siberia. In Chelyabinsk in February 2013, some 1,500 people were injured, but no one was killed. The Daily Mail and the Siberian Times reported that astronomers from Kazan Federal University in Tatarstan concluded that the loud boom sound, in spite of the earlier denials from the federal government, that they concluded that the bright flash of light meant that it had to be a large bolide that burned up in the atmosphere. But they didn't get a single data point on any of their instruments about any of it. The scientists argued that they didn't see or record anything of this huge light flash and the ground shaking and the boom because, quote, there was a strong blizzard on the early morning of January 7th, 2018, close quote, where they have the Kazan Federal University, without addressing the fact that it was reported more than 1,000 miles. And whatever happened in Russia on Sunday night, after midnight, that it was so astonishing, and that many people have said there was no weather, there was no thunder and no lightning in some of the towns and villages where there were security cameras that caught this big, bright flash. Perhaps it was a large meteorite hitting the atmosphere, as some scientists argue, but so far the bright sky-filling light over thousands of miles is still a weird mystery. In my January 9th, 2018 Earthfiles Science Report, I placed a compilation from the Siberian Times in Russia via the UK's Daily Mail so that viewers could see a combination of videotapes from a variety of sources that show this astonishing midnight sky that lights up from horizon to horizon on Sunday, January 7, 2018. And the video stamp shows clearly in one of the videotapes as just 2 or 3 minutes after midnight. This Russian phenomenon is in the category of the worldwide booms, with light flashes and shaking of homes and buildings so hard that sidewalks have cracked in many regions. This has been going on since January 2011. That's for 7 years, and there still are no adequate explanations. I have personally done 120 Earth Files news reports about the unexplained booms, metallic sounds, and the bright light flashes around the world in which authorities have no answers. If any of our Phenomena Radio listeners have experienced their own mystery of loud, unexplained, house-shaking booms with bright light flashes when there are no thunderstorms, or have any information about the boom, ground-shaking mystery where you live, please email me at earthfiles@earthfiles.com. Always think of a reporter who files news about the Earth, and all requests for anonymity are honored. This is Linda Moulton Howe. Please stay tuned to Earth Files news updates on KGRA Radio and visit every day my science, environment, and real X-Files news website, earthfiles.com, for more unbreaking stories about our universe, this solar system, and the planet we live on.
And that's the news brought to you by earthfiles.com. Now back to the program, kicking off the interview with Steven Bassett here in Hour 2. Here's Linda.
Thank you, Race. And Steve, thank you and welcome to Phenomena Radio. After an hour, that is the kind of content I think that you and I and others have always hoped that we would be able to be in the first time that things were breaking, having to do with official Department of Defense information, and that what Eric Davis did share goes to the heart of what you and I had talked about a few days ago. Why the heavy pushback, and where was the pushback coming from, and why, on things ranging from the air sound to the issue of the hoax video. And now it seems to me that both of those have been addressed well by Eric Davis. And I wonder, Steve, what is your perspective going forward, how this all might continue to unfold, even with a lot of political forces still trying to push back?
Certainly, anytime something of this magnitude comes out, there's going to be pushback. Because when something comes out these days, it goes on the web where 500 million people can check it out. And of course, any institutions, political, military, what have you, are aware of it. And so the idea that you just dare to do something profound these days and everybody will go, hey, that's cool. No. So I don't focus too much on pushback. It's to be expected. If it gets really intense and there seems to be a basis for it, I might pay attention. What I focus on is first, what's been revealed. And unless I have a strong reason not to accept it on its face, I accept it on its face, particularly when you're talking about government-related people coming forward, witnesses and what have you. The other thing I focus on is the context. That's my job. It's not to dig into a particular event and find out what plane was flying when and who was the pilot and what they had for breakfast. My job is to try to put in context any events that take place, because when you're operating at this level of significance, nothing happens in a vacuum. A random event can take place. You can do a little something. Nobody cares. But when you're talking about releasing the first gun camera footage ever in the history of the phenomena, I believe, that's not random, and that is not happening in a vacuum. And so what I want to give you tonight is what I believe is the larger context for what's going on. It is the best that I can come up with. It may very well be wrong in certain points, but it's worth understanding or knowing, considering if someone is going to be able to really grok what's going on here and get their mind around it. Otherwise, it's just an event. It's the difference between walking into a gallery with a 20-foot painting on the wall and walking up and putting your nose right on that painting and then trying to describe it to somebody, as opposed to stepping back 25 feet and describing that same painting. So with that in mind, Linda, John, And I'm going to say some things that people are going to find intriguing. Let me give you the context. There are four, and this is basically, we're going to go back. This is basically a 3-year context, but it does go back a little before that. There are 4 groups of people essentially involved here. One is Robert Bigelow and any people working with him at his aerospace facilities connected to this issue, which at one time included his whole National Institute of Discovery Sciences group, which has now been, he's closed it. The second group is Tom DeLonge and the team that he's put together. The third group is individuals that are not on Tom DeLonge's team, but are still operating and working within the Pentagon CIA connected to this issue, right? And the fourth group, and this is where it gets interesting, is is Bill and Hillary Clinton's political advisors and the team around them, going back all the way to 1993. These 4 groups are intertwined and connected in various ways to the events that are taking place. And I can say this only because I've been focused on the context behind this for nearly 15 years and have an enormous amount of information and knowledge about the Clinton situation. So with that in mind, here's the context. First, the Clintons get engaged in the issue during the Rockefeller Initiative, 93 to 96. Nothing happens. They drop it, go silent. After 2000, though, we know they're still hanging on there a little bit because John Podesta, one of the key people, mentions it a couple of times, refers to it, gets involved a little bit in some work by Leslie Kean. However, the Clintons politically saying absolutely nothing. This goes on for 10 years or so. Around 1995 or so, Tom DeLonge, I believe around that time, while the Rockefeller Initiative is underway at the White House, Tom DeLonge, who's had a lifelong interest in the subject, gets connected up with Steve Greer and helps him out. And there's some, and he participates in some of his programs, and I'm sure that elevates Tom's interest in the subject. And that's in that period. Many years go by, and Tom eventually drops out of the picture for a while, and we don't hear from him for some time. He's back with a new group. He's gone back with Blink-182. He forms another group, Angel and Airways, and makes a whole lot of money. And so it is that we start to approach the period around 2007. Something very interesting happens in 2007, we have now learned. And that is that Robert Bigelow, who had formed NIDS in 1995, the National Institute of Discovery Sciences, which had insiders on the board like John Alexander and others. But then that was 3 years before he even launched his aerospace company. He closes NIDS down around 2004, and then he gets involved with MUFON for a while, gives them a lot of money to do research, which was going to be provided to him. That doesn't really go well, and that gets dropped. And we knew about that, but what we didn't know is in 2007, because of his connections to Harry Reid, I imagine he probably provided Reid some funding for his campaigns. Reid, because of information provided by Bigelow to Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, he gets 2 other senators, Stevens and Inouye, to earmark $22 million for 5 years for a study in the Pentagon. They do it in such a way that no one else knows about it. It's not classified. It's not a black project. It's simply, I guess you could say, silent money. And not surprisingly, Bigelow is hired under this arrangement with the Pentagon to provide technical services and research. A gentleman by the name of Luis Elizondo is put in charge of the project. Now, why did the Pentagon do this? Only the Pentagon knows. However, Reid was a powerful man, and Bigelow was a powerful man. And by 2007, Bigelow had already been involved in very significant space research involving flexible habitat vehicles. He was doing this work with his money, saving NASA a lot of money, and I think it was probably well thought of. And so when the Pentagon was approached, they made the calculated decision that they would go ahead and do this. How much reluctance, we don't know. but they did start this program up, and it was funded for 5 years, 2007 to 2012. The funding went away, nothing surprising about that. Reed's political situation also changed. But Elizondo stayed on and continued to run the program, but with smaller funding, doing what he could. So that's 2007 to 2012. Okay, fine. Now, when we move into the period around 2014, things start to get really interesting. And to backdrop this, with respect to what Bigelow chose to do and Reed chose to do, Tom DeLonge, the Pentagon people, the Clintons, the backdrop for all of this, which I think your listeners must understand, is that the Truth Embargo, which is now in its 71st year, over the last 10 or 12 years has been slowly coming apart. It's losing its structure. It's not getting the service from the Pentagon or the national security structures that it used to get. Awareness is growing. It's simply slowly coming apart, though it's still roughly in place. And so the Pentagon, the CIA, and anybody in the White House or the Congress that knows anything about the subjects would know and have already calculated that the end of this embargo could well be at hand. And of course, the end of the embargo would mean a situation arises where the President of the United States does in fact announce the ET presence. And of course, a whole lot of things change at that point. And so everyone is considering their situation with respect to this possibility. In other words, I'm the Pentagon. Where do I want to be if that announcement finally is forced to come out on such and such a day? If I'm in the CIA, same thing. If I'm a politician, do I want to get involved? And so forth. And then there's a second factor here, which I'll have to take a little credit for because I've been pushing it for the last 10 years. And that is that the prospect of disclosure from another head of state is very real. And there are a number of candidates. And last I checked, we're not running Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin as CIA operatives. They can disclose to their people anytime they want to, and of course the U.S. would be holding the bag. And so the whole situation is now getting pretty tense. All right. And so people are taking various actions. Now, one of the people that was considering this was Hillary Clinton. She and her husband had a chance to be the disclosure presidential couple back in the 90s. It was taken away from them. Long story, another day. And not only that, but he was impeached and they were attacked, and it was a tough time. And they left with a vengeance. She wanted to be president, and a lot of the people in her team wanted to get back in government, all of which happened. But this issue, while they would like to have it for their own, they would like that legacy, was not something that they could directly involve if she wanted to fulfill her political ambitions. And so they remained silent. And she runs for president in 2008. We tried to get the issue out at that time. The press didn't bite. And then she runs again in 2014. And so by 2014, I was pretty sure what the plan was. Clinton hoped to become president and be disclosure president, as well as the first woman president. However, the Truth Embargo was coming unraveled, and there was a chance it might happen under Obama. And so they covered themselves by basically filling up his administration with Rockefeller Initiative people. Herself, almost Richardson, Leon Panetta, John Podesta, they were all working with Obama, who was almost certainly tipped off at least that, this is in play, Barack. So you need to sort of know something. That doesn't mean that CIA was giving Barack any briefings on this. And so all of this is moving forward toward 2014. And at some point, of course, she figures out, I can make the White House, and then I can deal with this issue. So that's what's happening with the Clinton people as we approach the end of 2014. Over on the Bigelow side, he is working on his projects. He is making very good progress with his habitat structures. He has already gotten signed up with NASA to do a test at the International Space Station. He's very happy. Of course, over at the CIA, we now know that this study was going on all the way through 2012 and then onward after that under Elizondo's direction. So we know about that. And we also learned about Tom DeLonge's situation. And this is where things get really, really intense. Here is what we know about DeLonge's trajectory here. He got involved heavily in the 90s. He backed away. Didn't hear from him. He turns up in 2011 to give an interview to George Knapp, Coast to Coast. He likes George. Talks about forming a website called Strange Things. It's going to put out lots of information to the public. It's going to have a commercial aspect, going to do some books and all that. It's all very cool, very nice. And then he disappears for 3 more years. Strange Things gets up, but eventually it's shut down. He appears again in George Knapp in 2014, and he talks about the fact that he's got some books now put together, about 4 or 5 that they're going to publish. So he's already got some books kind of in the works, but that's all he had to say. And then we don't hear from him again until he turns up on George Knapp, Coast to Coast AM, March 2016, and drops a bombshell. And essentially what he says, which I initially did not believe, but I did come to believe, was that because of all the work that he was doing and the ideas that he had about producing this material to get to a younger audience, keep in mind, the current generation probably knows very little about the history of this field going back to Roswell. He started having interactions with people connected to the Pentagon. And he finally convinced them to listen to him. And it's really an absolutely amazing story. George Knapp has stated that it's definitely got to be a movie. And I have no doubt that eventually it will be a movie. But he approaches at a party that he was invited to, the head of a major company involved in research. And he convinces him to talk to him a little further. And ultimately, he is then given an opportunity to meet a CIA guy at the Pentagon, which I'm pretty sure was Luis Elizondo. He has a meeting with him and 2 others, and they decide it's worth introducing him to, quote, the general, who has never been named. He meets the general. The general then refers him to NASA. And ultimately what comes out of this is that they finally agree that Tom's idea to get this information out in a palatable way, entertainment, nonfiction, fiction, documentary, songs, whatever, they liked it. Now understand, when he approaches them back around 2000, I think this would have been around 2014, Elizondo was still running that program. And so Elizondo had the interest that would have connected him to the Pentagon. But of course, then the question is, why is Elizondo still doing that? Why is the Pentagon allowing this program to continue? But whatever, before you know it, what has come to pass, and this is what he announces on March of 2016, halfway through that election year, is that the Pentagon has provided him a 10-person advisory team. They're giving him lots of information. This information is going to go into books. It's going to go into a doc to provide information to the public without violating, apparently, any non-disclosures or breaking any laws. Tom made it very clear that his interactions with the Pentagon and the CIA were very respectful. He was very careful. Anything that he did, he got approval. He treated them with high respect. And he makes it very clear in this interview that his principal goal was to demonstrate to the public that the actions of the government through this entire period, going back to the 40s, was very meritorious, that they had a tough situation. They were operating for national security reasons. They had our best interest at heart, and they have been unduly attacked by a host of conspiracy theorists and what have you, frustrated by the fact that it is still kept embargoed, and they're getting a bad rap. And so ultimately what you have here is the Pentagon has made a public relations decision, and they're using Tom DeLonge to put it out. Why would they make that move now? And now I'm going to give you the punchline. Because something else was going on, and this is where I come in. As you know, the Rockefeller Initiative had been known to us since 2000. We had given information and documents to the press over and over again. They wouldn't engage it. They wouldn't even engage it when she ran for president in 2008. But when she ran for president in started her campaign in 2014, there was a development that changed the scenario. It's changed the scene. And that development was the citizen hearing on disclosure, which was held in 2013 in Washington National Press Club. The 30 hours of testimony included 2 hours of testimony about the Rockefeller Initiative and the Clintons. And in November of 2014, that entire 30-hour record was delivered to every office, every congressional office on Capitol Hill. And then I arrived in Washington late in November, hired my public relations person, and she went after the media. I started trying to get meetings on the Hill, pushing what? The ET connection between the leading candidate to be president and the ET issue through the Rockefeller Initiative. And this time the media bought. And the story started running in November and December in Washington media, and eventually there would be over 400 articles directly referring to Clinton's ET connection. But put that aside for a moment. What was happening in December is that articles were being written, the press was getting on it, and they started calling the Clinton campaign headquarters. And they wanted to get comments from her, from the candidate, about the Rockefeller Initiative and the Clinton ET connection, the statements by Podesta in the previous years, and they had nothing to say. They stonewalled them all, meaning they got contacted. They didn't even give them a response, not a no comment, not a get lost. They stonewalled them because they knew if they were to get into any intense back and forth with the media, the whole thing was going to blow sky high. And if it did, Barack Obama was going to be disclosure president, and she wanted that legacy. And so under that pressure, which built all the way through December and January, the Clinton team had a very tough decision to make. They knew that with these articles coming out one after another, New York Times, Washington Post, Washington Times, that if they didn't say something, the media was going to get really intense. And so they finally broke ranks on February the 3rd, 2015, when John Podesta put out now the legendary tweet as he left his job as advisor to Barack Obama to become the chairman of Hillary Clinton's campaign. He puts out a tweet saying, my biggest regret for 2014 is not once again getting the hashtag disclosure of the UFO files. He didn't do that because he felt like it. He didn't do that for the hell of it. He did it because he was under heavy pressure from reporters that I was sicking on him as part of the ET, that the political initiative paradigm research was engaging at that time. All right. And then from that point forward, February 3rd, 2015 to June the 2nd, 2016, the Clintons or Podesta or Bill Clinton or even Barack Obama spoke to this issue in controlled settings like the Jimmy Kimmel Show 12 times. And each time they spoke to the issue, more press ensued. What they were doing was trying to cut a middle path, say enough so that it shows that we're not trying to stonewall, but don't say too much because the thing can't blow up until I get to the White House. A reasonable strategy. It would not have worked, however, because the media was building very quickly. I was at some point working with 42 separate reporters, including 2 Pulitzer Prize winners, on a source basis. They were getting regular updates from me, and many of them were writing articles about this, and it was only going to get worse. And so that was their situation as of mid-2016. So now let's look at the bigger context. What is the situation as we approach the election? The situation is this, that as early as 2000 and early 2015, the CIA and the Pentagon, which we know was already engaging with Tom DeLonge, right, was aware that the leading candidate to be president, ahead in all the polls against any other candidate, was engaging the issue, had a history, and probably intended to disclose once she was in the White House. And of course, if that happens, then they had a decision to make. Are they going to remain, steadfast, say nothing until finally it comes out? Or do they want to get ahead of the issue, get a position out there, show that they're being somewhat transparent, something to improve their status once disclosure comes? I think that's exactly what they chose to do. And Tom DeLonge was the person to do it, which is why there was so much emphasis in DeLong's statements about the public relations aspect of showing that these men and women in the Pentagon and CIA had conducted the ET issue with the best intentions. And so all is going forward very nicely. Now, a lot of people didn't believe Tom DeLonge for a while. I certainly was skeptical. But as it came forward, when he published the book Secret Machines, I'm beginning to say, I think he's serious about this. All right? And so all is fine. And then things start to get wobbly. First, you had the release of the DNC emails by WikiLeaks. It wasn't too damaging, a little embarrassing, not a problem. But then, 2 weeks out from the campaign, a major event takes place. WikiLeaks releases 50,000 more emails from John Podesta's files. These emails were provided to WikiLeaks by somebody. Supposedly it was Russians, but whoever provided it, Mr. Assange, because he doesn't like Hillary Clinton for a lot of reasons, decided not to just dump them out, but to put them out in 5,000 units at a time, day after day for 10 days in order to have maximum impact. Well, I was excited about this because I knew there were plenty of emails in his files regarding ET issues. I had sent some myself. When it was all said and done, there were about 100 emails referring to ET issues in one way or another in those emails. But what was most interesting is that Tom DeLonge was mentioned nearly 50 times. And what those emails confirmed was that DeLonge, in fact, was engaging the issue. He was meeting with people in the Pentagon. He had arranged to meet with Podesta to do a documentary shoot, which he did. And there was dialogue going back and forth, which completely then confirmed that DeLonge's statements to MAP from the beginning were all true. This guy had put $400,000 behind this. He was dead serious, and he had direct cooperation from insiders in the Pentagon and the CIA. Okay, fine. However, there was a problem because some of the people that he had referred to Podesta weren't supposed to be known. And when those emails come out, they're outed. That was a problem, but not a major problem. Because Hillary Clinton is going to become the disclosure president. This is all going to come out just fine, except that one more thing happened. The FBI, which was in a possible situation, made a couple of maneuvers at the end, which probably it shouldn't have done, but I understand the predicament they were in. And the effect of all of that, plus a lot of other shenanigans, Hillary Clinton lost the election, and it was over. Everything blew sky high. I went into rather severe depression and ultimately left the country, all right? And so what happens then, all right? Well, first of all, Tom DeLonge, he goes quiet. We don't hear anything. Months go by. And then he starts to say, well, something's coming together here. Watch what's happening. Stay tuned. I got something happening. And more months go by. And then finally he makes a move. It's October 11th. 2017, essentially 9 months after the inauguration, 10 months after the election. Why the delay? I think I know. Right. So what took place was this. When the Podesta emails came out and she loses the election, the people inside had a major problem. This wasn't going where they wanted it to go. And most of the insiders now had to step back. They could not be exposed. They could not be involved. And so now he doesn't have the team that he had before. And so he's got to put a new team together. And finally, he's able to do that because I am sure the people inside still wanted him to go forward, but it had to be under slightly different circumstances. And he finally announces that team on October the 11th, 2017. It's not a big deal. It's not a press conference. It is a presentation from a stage to no audience, but it is very, very significant. The team that he announces is amazing. It's got powerful former insiders at multiple levels: Skunk Works, CIA, DIA, Pentagon. No team like this has ever been put together. And most interestingly, 2 of those people had just resigned from CIA and DOD positions and immediately joined this team. What does that tell you? It tells you that under the new circumstances, the team could not have any people actually working with the government. So they had to leave. So they conveniently retired and joined up. Fine. All right. Keep in mind that those people, when you have 32 years or 22 or 30 years with the Pentagon and CIA, you have a range of lucrative options available to you. Big contracts, consulting, big money. No, they choose to go with a fledgling operation regarding the ET issue because they had very good reasons to do so. And so that announcement goes down. And one of the interesting things about that announcement was that they had formed a public service corporation, which operates under fairly loose SEC rules, that would allow people to invest in a range of projects they're going to do, all surrounding or involved, related one or another to the ET issue. $5 a share, 200 minimum. Very notably, they raised $2 million within about 30 days. Not only does that provide money for operations and structure, but it gets people involved. It gets the regular citizens involved in this. It gives them a piece of the action, right? It also shows how serious this business is. Okay, fine. Now what happens? They wait about 2 months, right? And in that 2 months, they basically deliver a story to the New York Times. It's their next maneuver. And by the way, they're pacing this out very, very reasonable pace. They're not pushing it, and I think I know why. Because you need to get the media's attention and you need to keep it. So you don't play all your cards. You keep playing a good hand about every couple of months. And so they feed the story to the New York Times. They've got the connection to Leslie Kean already. Helene, I forget her last name, Bodine or and then they bring in Ralph Blumenthal, the Pulitzer Prize winner, for a little gravitas. As it happens, Ralph Blumenthal is about to release a book regarding the ET issue a little later this year. Pulitzer Prize winner. I know what it's about. I'm sworn to secrecy on it, but it'll happen soon. And they write this article, and it's a major game changer. And as you know, they reveal the study that Elizondo ran starting in 2007. They reveal the connection to Harry Reid, and they also reveal gun camera footage. They provide gun camera footage that the Times can then write up, and the pilot that was in the plane. Now, I have been in this issue for a long time. To my knowledge, there has never been any gun camera footage released, ever. It's possible that, as you pointed out, that maybe somebody, and it would not have been authorized, I believe, sent a piece of footage to somebody doing a doc that turned up in 2007. But that was not intentional, and that person might even be in jail right now. Because the fact is, as you well know, Linda, the U.S. government has got racks of gun camera footage, visual, FLIR, of chase events and intercepts of UAPs going back to the 1950s. And none of that has been released, because if they did, the Truth Embargo would virtually blow up. And so, wow, the first gun camera footage ever is released, and it's a beaut. It is well backed up. It's to a known event that has been researched before, the Nimitz Aircraft Carrier Task Force event. The pilot is there. It is compelling. But let's not forget something else that happened. Again, I'm trying to show how orchestrated how well planned this is. When they made the announcement in October 11, 2017, the first person that spoke after Tom DeLonge gave his introduction was Chris Mellon. Chris Mellon's background is easy to find. You just go to the Stars Academy website. But what is the very first thing that Chris Mellon does? He steps up to the mic and immediately starts to run through the chronology of the Nimitz Aircraft Carrier Task Force incident. And he runs right through it and makes it very clear in this chronology that thing that they were seeing was not a human craft.
Right.
He basically says extraterrestrials are here. Whoa. But guess what? Somebody else had just recently said the same thing. Just a couple of months before the announcement by to the Stars Academy, Bigelow, who we know has been involved with that group going all the way back to 2007, is interviewed on 60 Minutes, CBS 60 Minutes, which is about as big a news show as you get, appropriately because they had just tested his flexible habitat at the ISS. Huge milestone for him. Totally appropriate to now go interview this very interesting man. They knew his history. They knew he was connected to the ET issue. They knew about NIDS. And he knew that they would ask him about the UFO question, but the questions were not submitted in advance. But he knew it was coming. And so, of course, the reporter asked him about his interest in the UFOs, at which point he deliberately and intentionally, as he intended, tells her flat out, there's an extraterrestrial presence here.
Under everyone's nose.
Yeah. He actually, that was the second. He said it twice. The first time he said it, she looks at him. You look at her face and you're going, she didn't see that coming. And she goes back, she snaps right back and says, well, aren't you afraid that people might think you're a little maybe nuts or something? And he says, I don't give a damn. It is the second most important I don't give a damn in American history. The first one, of course, was by Gone with the Wind. Clark Gable says it to Vivian Lee. Well, this is even more powerful than that one. And then she doubles back on him, right? And he says they're right under your nose. What? Now, understand that he did this for a reason. First, he was frustrated and angry. The damn truth embargo was underway still after all these years, knowing that if it were to end, his dreams of space advance and all of his research and all of his engineering would immediately flower, right? So he's fed up. He's angry. He's probably angry that all the other billionaires in this country, entertainment, high tech, haven't got the guts to say anything to this issue. They know damn well it's real. But also, remember, he was involved in the Elizondo program at the Pentagon. He knew what was going on with Tom DeLonge. He knows these things are moving forward, and he decides, I'm going to give it a little shot in the arm. And so he does that in May, and then DeLonge gives his makes his presentation in October. Mellon basically says there's ETs here, and then 2 months later, they put out the gun camera footage. That is the context behind what this is all about. And the final punchline here is this. It is clear that individuals within the CIA and the Pentagon, not everyone, but individuals that have the ability to maneuver have made a decision that the CIA and the Pentagon is not going to stand with its arms folded on the porch waiting for some head of state to announce the ET presence, and then they're going to have to walk out in front of 1,000 cameras and deal with a massive public relations problem. That they are going to not only help position themselves to look a lot better come that day, but also to help move things along without violating any national security directives, right? But and also not violating their relationship with the head of state, the president. He is their boss. They cannot do unilateral, I would say major decisions, but they felt they could operate in this way, and they've chosen to do that. Now, there may be other groups inside the CIA and the Pentagon that don't like this, but obviously they don't have the power to stop it. And so that is what is going on. And then there's two other factors here that I'll throw out that for people to consider, and then I'll take your questions. And that is there a political connection to this? And what about Vladimir Putin? All right. Yeah. The political connection is this, that up until just a few weeks, 2 weeks before the election, anybody in the Pentagon, and believe me, they have very powerful game management systems. They can project stuff in ways we can't even imagine, were certain that she was going to win. And therefore, they were predicating their strategies on a Clinton presidency, the Rockefeller Initiative coming out, the Clinton speaking to the issue, and undoubtedly reaching for that brass ring. And they acted accordingly. When that ended, everything changed. So that is the political connection. And I'm going to take a little credit for that because a lot of people don't know how PRG was driving that story. But I can assure you, if PRG wasn't doing its initiative in Washington, there would have been no tweet from John Podesta. There would have been no further statements from them. And that story would not have been in play. But that's not known. Very few people know about that because I have not really talked about it much, though I'm about to launch a new website and it'll all be in there. In any event, all right, the second part is Putin. And this gets really interesting because, as you know, Russia and Putin apparently got deep into that election. So there was a whole lot going on there just on the pure geopolitical level regarding the politics, but there's this other factor. What if Vladimir Putin were to decide to become the disclosure president and yank it out from under the U.S.? Well, that would be a real problem. Well, guess what? For the last 10 years, and you know this, Linda, I've been talking about Vladimir Putin and that prospect almost every time I'm on radio, and I'm on radio a lot. However, in May of this year, after I'd come back, I came back in April to London because I just couldn't function in the U.S. I decided to spend more time focusing on international stuff and to work on this new website, which is a 2-month project. While I was in London in May, I got a call from a Russian network, national network, REN-TV. They wanted to interview me in London. I said, no. If you want to interview me in Moscow. And they said, fine, you buy the ticket, we'll interview here. I got the ticket, got the visa, and went to Moscow on May the 3rd. I stayed for 7 days. On the morning of May the 3rd, I gave an hour-and-a-half interview in English to the journalist for REN-TV. And eventually, about a minute or two of that was used in one of their programs, which you can find, but it's in Russian. It's dubbed in Russian. And then later that week, I met with 6 groups. This was arranged by one of my supporters out of Italy. And all 6 of these groups had members. This was like 3 meetings a day, 2 days at a hotel there. Every one of these groups had members in it that had formerly worked for the Russian or Soviet government dealing with the ET issue. One of which, believe it or not, was the chief of staff to Lavrov, the foreign minister. So why did I do that? I mean, I got 4 people in front of me. I got a translator who's good but not great. There's not a hell of a lot you can accomplish under those circumstances, but it was a little get to know how you're doing. Why did I do it? Because I knew if I took those meetings, there was no way the Kremlin would not have known that I was in town. And more importantly, there was no way the CIA would not have known that I'd arrived in Russia. Okay, fine. But there was one more thing to accomplish. I needed the English full interview, which I eventually got 2.5 months later, and just the last 2 weeks started releasing what will be 10 segments of that interview, including the main segment. And the main segment is where I go into depth on Russian and U.S. politics and discuss the pros and cons of Vladimir Putin being the disclosure president, which I had done on English interviews in the U.S., but nobody had ever done in Russian media, ever, let alone on Russian soil. And I knew that was going to create a potential stink, no problem. And I'm about to release within the next 10, 12 days that core segment of the Russian interview to the media as a press release, right? I'm lined up for 8 conferences already this year. And I'm going to be heavily pushing this. Why? Because I know that the Putin issue, the concern about Putin as the disclosure president, is a major factor in the motivations behind the people inside the Pentagon and the CIA to make these rather daring maneuvers in using a well-off, well-meaning, and I think a pretty good guy, Tom DeLonge, to do public relations for them and bring out information, including the very first gun camera footage. This is huge. At this pace, if we continue even a little much further down the line at this pace, disclosure is going to happen this year. All right, that's the that's the context for all of this. You got any questions? Give me your best shot.
Yeah, Steve, it seems to me that one of the ironies is that Putin is one corner, the United States is a second, but the third, China and Xi, and they are determined to start building a base in the Shackleton crater in the south of the moon, where there's about 97% sunlight all of the time, so they have all kinds of energy. Mm-hmm. And if China gets the base built in the Shackleton crater first, the United States may have some secret base underground or in a hill or something on the moon. But China could be the one that's there first. And then from everything that we know, there has always been some kind of an alien presence inside or the backside or having something to do with the moon. And it may be that China is the one that ends up being able to demonstrate that there's an alien presence.
Well, China already knows there's an alien presence. Again,
we talk about demonstrating it.
Well, yeah, I mean, but demonstrating gun camera footage. They have lots of airplanes too. They've been intercepting these things over their airspace. They've got FLIR footage. They could probably put 100 examples out there. They've got pilots. But you made a good point.
Keep China from just taking the bull by the horns, as Scott Jones said when he went there for Senator Pell back in the 1970s. And Scott Jones did an interview and said China has everything: the bodies, the craft. Sure. They have everything that we all want to see. And when he was leaving, he asked through his translator to the political person back in the 70s, you have everything. Why are you not going to the world? And that the political person bowed, putting their hands together to Scott Jones. And when they stood up, the translator said, because we are waiting for the United States to act. Quote,
yes.
Quote. Now, I said to Scott, does that mean, is it possible that when Nixon was in China in the late 60s, is it possible that a secret executive order of some sort went down, or an agreement about giving the United States the lead on announcing to the world? And we're at this point where it's beginning, but China is in a position to break it all open.
Sure. And I've mentioned this, right? I've mentioned that Xi Jinping certainly is in the position to do it as well. And so really the Pentagon has got two major heads of state to worry about, Xi Jinping and Putin. But in order to keep the message focused, and because I know that Putin is far more of an irritant to them than Xi Jinping, in other words, of the two, if they had to pick one, in other words, if one of those two is going to pull the rug out from under the U.S., who would you prefer? Xi Jinping would get all their votes. Putin would just be a geopolitical disaster. So I'm put the focus on there. But the fact is that Xi Jinping could do it tomorrow. So you see how vulnerable the Pentagon and the CIA is. They've got a chaotic political situation. They've got a president they didn't want. And they've got the potential for disclosure to take place outside the U.S., that leaving them with egg on their face. And then they've got a post-disclosure president in the U.S. that's going to have to deal with one of the difficult, complex problems in history that doesn't seem to have perhaps the necessary skills. It's a mess. But nevertheless, the truth embargo is still fading. And so one of the things I would add to this scenario is that I think they stepped back and reconfigured and pushed it down the line but they still went ahead with it. Why? Because one, regardless of the political situation in the U.S., disclosure could end at any time. So they needed to do something. But also, they, as I pointed before, they have extremely powerful, not only computers, but also skilled people to do game playing and assessing what's going on in the U.S. and predictive scenarios. Much more than we. And I think they were able to find a side that President Trump probably could not remain in office past a year and a couple of months, but he might be gone by January, February, March. And the time frame that's playing out is roughly about that. And that's a whole nother discussion. I don't need to get into it. But if they calculated that, then they would know that at this pace, disclosure might happen, but it wouldn't be a Donald Trump disclosure. It would be a Pence or a Ryan disclosure, or a president selected by the House of Representatives under another scenario. And so they're playing a difficult game of chess with the pieces that they have. And I think the timing is also somewhat connected to the political realities regarding Trump. Again, what's at stake here? Which nation is the first to disclose? Which head of state gets one of the greatest legacies in history? What is the political situation in America when that happens? How is the Pentagon and the CIA going to look to the public if it happens? These are huge vectors that they're trying to assemble.
Hey,
and I have much
Steve,
empathy for it. Yes, sir.
Steve, I don't want to cut you off, but I'm getting a hard wrap. So I want to take the time to thank you for coming on. But I'll make a prediction. I don't see disclosure this year. I see it in 19 or 20.
Of course. Of course.
Right. On that note, we'll have you back again when there is more development. So thank you for doing this live from London. Steve Bassett, PRG, one of the heroes behind getting the truth out. Thank you.
No problem.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
All right, an absolutely fantastic show. For John Burroughs, Linda Moulton Howe, Dr. Eric Davis, and Steven Bassett, I'm Race Hobbs, thanking all of you for joining us tonight. Stay tuned for 3 hours of the legendary Jimmy Church and Fade to Black Live. Tonight's Fader Night with open lines right here on your contact for the very best in alternative talk radio on the internet. We're KGRAradio.com. Have a great night and a great weekend, everybody.